In these two movies, we're going to look at the basic notation of communication diagrams. In this movie, I'll briefly contrast communication diagrams with sequence diagrams, then look at lifelines and the links between them. In the next movie, we'll look at messages in communication diagrams. Communication diagrams model interactions, as sequence diagrams do, but they're equivalent to a simplified version of sequence diagrams without the same richness of notation. Communication diagrams don't have any of the structural elements that sequence diagrams have, in the form of interaction occurrences or combined fragments. They're used in situations where the structure of the relationships between the lifelines in the diagram is important, as the links needed for message passing would be reflected in relationships in the class diagrams. Lifelines in communication diagrams have the same notation as in sequence diagrams, but without the dashed line going down the page. They represent instances of model elements, usually objects, that take part in an interaction, and as in sequence diagrams, they can be used for actors. Lifeline names reflect the fact that they're objects. The name can be the name of an object. If the object is part of some kind of array or collection where the multiplicity can be greater than 1, then there may be a selector that identifies which instance is being referred to. The name could be the name of the class or interface or other type that is participating in the interaction, in which case it's preceded by a colon. The name can be a combination of object name followed by a colon and then the name of the class. In a communication diagram, there are links shown between lifelines to show the paths that messages will need to follow. These links reflect where there would be links in an object diagram and associations, compositions or aggregations in a class diagram. Let's have a look at how we would add lifelines into a diagram in Enterprise Architect before we look at messages in communication diagrams. So here we are in Enterprise Architect. Communication diagrams can be used to analyse the interaction in use cases in the same way as with sequence diagrams. So we'll start with use cases. I'll add a communication diagram to the use case Add a Device in the same way as we did with the sequence diagram. I open up the use case diagram, right-click on the use case and select New Child Diagram, Interaction, and this time with Communication Diagram. I'll give it the same name as the use case. Note that in the project browser, we now have two interactions underneath the Add a Device use case, one with a communication diagram and one with a sequence diagram. And we can tell the difference between them by the icons that are used for the diagrams. I want to add lifelines into this new diagram. I'll start with the actor. I'm going to click on the actor in the toolbox and then on the diagram pane. I'll call the actor Engineer with a small e. I need to make it an instance of the actor Engineer. So I right-click on it, select Advanced Instance Classifier, and then browse to where I've got the actors in the use case view within the model. You can see it's added the classifier name after the name of the object. Now I'll add the lifelines for the other objects that will interact. I can do this from the toolbox or from the project browser. I'll add the controller from the toolbox. Although technically these are lifelines, EA uses the term object here. So I click on Object and on the diagram pane. I'll call this Controller, and then I'll assign it to the class Add Device Controller. Advanced Instance Classifier, and then I browse. This time I'm looking in the class view. It's that one, Add Device Controller. The other way to add lifelines is to do it from the project browser. I need to add the GUI lifeline, which is an instance of Add Device UI. Here it is in the project browser. I can drag it into the diagram. I'm going to add it as an instance or object here. As I said, the term lifeline isn't used in Enterprise Architect in communication diagrams. And I click OK. I'll give this the name GUI. I'll do the same for device. I'll use an instance of on-off device in this case. And I'll call it device. I've added all the lifelines I need. Now I can create the links between them. I do this as I would in an object diagram. I can either use the communications relationships in the toolbox, or I can use the quick linker. I'll use the toolbox first. I open up communication relationships and select the simple line, which Enterprise Architect calls associate. I click on it and then drag from one element on the diagram to another. Generally, the quick linker is quicker, as you would expect, so I'll create the other links that way. From the actor to Add Device UI, I select Link in this case, from Controller to GUI, and from Controller to Device. So in this movie, I've added a communication diagram and added lifelines or objects into it. I've created links between some of the lifelines to provide paths for messages. Now let's look at messages in communication diagrams before coming back to add them into the model.